All right, let's dive right in and unpack Shakespeare's absolute masterpiece. We're going on a really fascinating journey today in this explainer, moving all the way from the historical and literary roots of the play straight through to its breakneck, blood-soaked finale. So whether you're totally familiar with the Prince of Denmark or just brushing up on your Shakespeare, we are going to break down the psychology, the history, and the underlying structure of this incredible tragedy.
You know, what's really interesting is that the story of Hamlet actually goes way back. It traces back to a 13th century book of Danish history by a guy named Saxo Grammaticus, and it features a character named Amleth. Now, that name originates from the old Icelandic noun amlothi, which literally translates to a fool, or someone who is acting wild and raging. I mean, centuries before Shakespeare even penned the play, the very name of our protagonist was hardwiring him for his famous descent into feigned, or, well, perhaps very real, madness.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're covering 1. Origins and historical context, 2. Key characters and foils, 3. Act by act the setup, 4. Act by act the climax, and 5. The tragic Act 5. Let's get into it.
Section 1. Origins and historical context. Let's look at how the massive historical and religious shifts happening during Shakespeare's time fundamentally shaped Prince Hamlet's devastating internal struggle.
So, if we want to truly understand Hamlet's infamous delays, we've got to talk about the dramatic element of thought, specifically the philosophical and religious shifts of the Protestant Reformation. See, at the time this was written, Protestant England heavily frowned upon the Catholic idea of purgatory, and that is exactly where the ghost of King Hamlet claims he's suffering. So when Hamlet finally gets a chance to kill his murderous uncle Claudius, he stops, because Claudius is praying. Hamlet's deeply ingrained religious worldview makes him terrified that killing a praying man will send his uncle's soul straight to heaven, instead of punishing him in hell. It's just a profound spiritual gridlock that completely paralyzes him.
Moving to Section 2, Key Characters and Foils. Let's meet the major players through the dramatic element of character. In drama, a foil is a character who contrasts with another to highlight specific traits, so we can deeply understand who Hamlet truly is simply by seeing who he isn't. Just look at the stark contrast between Hamlet's paralyzing over-analysis and Laertes' explosive demand for vengeance. I mean, both men lose their fathers to murder, right? But while Hamlet spends months philosophizing, staging plays, and doubting his own sanity, Laertes returns to Elsinore in an absolute rage. He threatens the king and demands immediate, unthinking retaliation. Laertes perfectly highlights Hamlet's fatal flaw of extreme hesitation.
And then, on the flip side, we've got Horatio. While Hamlet is just spiraling into emotional volatility and struggling to trust literally anyone in the royal court, his university friend Horatio remains a stoic loyalist. Horatio provides this completely grounded baseline for both the prince and us, the audience. King Claudius simply cannot manipulate Horatio, making him the only completely safe harbor in a castle that is entirely built on lies.
Now, while Horatio kind of escapes all that manipulation, the women of Elsinore, Queen Gertrude and Ophelia, are just tragically constrained. They are constantly manipulated and restricted by the deeply entrenched patriarchal values of the royal court. I mean, Gertrude's incredibly hasty marriage to Claudius essentially kicks off Hamlet's entire disgust with the world. And meanwhile, Ophelia's entire existence is dictated by the men around her: her father Polonius, her brother Laertes, and Hamlet himself. They're constantly speaking to her in these infantilizing or highly sexualized ways, completely stripping away her personal agency.
Which brings us to literally one of the most famous and brutal lines in the whole play, spoken by Hamlet to Ophelia. Looking through the dramatic element of diction, this cruel dismissal highlights the intense misogyny the women face. By yelling, "Get thee to a nunnery," Hamlet is directly punishing Ophelia for the political machinations of her father, Polonius, who basically forced her to spy on him. It is such a tragic moment, where the innocents suffer for the sins of the powerful.
Section 3. Act by act, the setup. With those character dynamics firmly established, let's trace the accelerating tension of the plot.
Right from the jump, in the very first scene, the text sets up this thematic world of decay and theatrical spectacle. There is a massive gap between appearance and reality here. Claudius is playing the role of a joyous, capable new king, giving these formal, ceremonial speeches. Meanwhile, Hamlet is dressed in pitch black, delivering melancholic soliloquies about how the world is an unweeded garden. The arrival of the ghost completely shatters this fragile illusion of normalcy.
And man, the tension really builds early on, and a lot of that is thanks to Polonius. As the king's manipulative counselor, he injects this toxic atmosphere of conniving political intrigue right into the castle. I mean, look at what he does. He literally sends an agent, Reynaldo, all the way to Paris to spread rumors and spy on his own son. Then, he forces his daughter Ophelia to act as bait while he and Claudius hide behind a tapestry or an arras to spy on Hamlet. Trust is just completely non-existent here.
Section 4, Act by Act, the climax. Let's move into Acts 3 and 4, where Hamlet's plans to expose the king spiral completely and violently out of control.
So here we hit the major turning point of the plot. On one hand, we have Hamlet successfully using a troupe of actors to stage a murder mimicking his father's death, and Claudius's panicked reaction to it absolutely confirms his guilt. It's a huge win. But right after this monumental victory, Hamlet finds Claudius vulnerable, in prayer. And as we discussed earlier, his hyper-rational theological overthinking kicks in and he refuses to strike. He literally misses his perfect window.
That single failure to act, it triggers an absolute, catastrophic downward spiral. Moments after sparing the king, Hamlet mistakenly stabs right through a tapestry, murdering the spine Polonius. This accidental murder is the ultimate catalyst. It gives Claudius the perfect excuse to ship Hamlet off to England to be executed. Worse, the grief of losing her father completely shatters Ophelia's mind, leading to her tragic drowning. And this, in turn, brings a furious Laertes back to Denmark, allowing Claudius to manipulate him into a deadly, poisoned fencing match with Hamlet. It's just a domino effect of disaster.
Section 5, the tragic Act V. This brings us to the devastating, breakneck conclusion of our explainer.
But, right before the sheer violence of the climax, Shakespeare does something amazing. He hits pause. He gives us some dark, philosophical humor in the graveyard. Hamlet banters with literal clowns, gravediggers unearthing the past. And when Hamlet holds the skull of Yorick, a jester he actually loved in his childhood, he is forced to look death right in the eye. He realizes that no matter how great you are, whether you're Alexander the Great or just a simple fool, everyone returns to the dust. It is the great equalizer.
Then, bam! From those quiet philosophical words, we crash instantly into fatal action as the fencing match begins. Here, the dramatic element of melody shifts entirely, from the rhythmic cadence of poetic dialogue to the chaotic, terrifying tempo of clashing swords and treachery. What was supposed to be a friendly, rigged sport rapidly devolves. Swords are dropped, scuffles break out, and those poisoned rapier blades get switched right in the heat of combat.
When you actually map out this grim scorecard, it reveals the ultimate, bitter irony of the whole tragedy. Claudius's complex web of poison traps ultimately backfires entirely. Queen Gertrude unknowingly drinks the poisoned wine intended for her son. Laertes is pierced by his own poison blade after it's swapped. Hamlet, though fatally wounded, finally forces Claudius to suffer both the poisoned sword and the poisoned cup. I mean, the entire royal family is wiped out in a matter of minutes.
So, as the dust and chaos finally settle, there is literally only one man left standing in the royal court. The stoic, unmanipulated Horatio tries to drink the remaining poison, but Hamlet stops him. He begs Horatio to stay alive in this harsh world, simply to tell his true story. And as Hamlet dies, Prince Fortinbras of Norway marches in to claim a completely broken, empty kingdom.
So as we wrap up this explainer today, I really want to leave you with this to chew on. We always ask if Hamlet was mad, but looking at the massive body count and the actions of men like Laertes, was Hamlet really destroyed by a descent into madness, or was he simply destroyed by thinking too much and feeling too deeply in a brutal world that demanded absolutely nothing but unthinking action? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll catch you next time.